Snow is falling past the window, softly coloring the quiet world. Holding a warm cup in my hands, I breathe out and settle in. I realize I don't have to rush. This moment gently tells me so. Every small and tender sound loosens something deep inside. And with one slow breath it feels like the day can start again. In a room where falling snow fades into a
She becomes
quiet
glamorous
hush.
after the engagement annulment. Chapter 17. How dare she insult mommy and even hit her brother? Translator. Atlas Studios editor. Atlas Studios. The door of the ward was then shut. However, one could still vaguely hear the conversation inside. Lisa said, "Dad, Nora is..." "Don't speak her name. How kindly did your mother treat her?" "She treated her like she was her own, but how is she any different from Henry now? She's holding on so stubbornly to the company and just standing by as your mother dies." Irene said, "Don't say that about Nora. She's not doing anything because she knows it's useless even if she lets go of the company. Don't vent your anger on someone else." "I know, but I feel so awful when I see her so indifferent." Will suddenly couldn't hold it in anymore, and he started to sob bitterly. Nora, who was standing outside, could feel their helplessness and anger even through the glass windows. "Don't you feel bad?" Henry stood behind her. "For the sake of a company, are you really going to disregard your aunt's life?" Their disputes here were too loud, and it had attracted a circle of onlookers. Nora looked down and sent a text message to Lisa on her cell phone, telling her to get ready and that someone would be coming to operate on her aunt in a few days. After sending the text message, she ignored Henry and the others' angry castigation and turned to leave calmly. Nearby, Justin stood there with Lawrence. A relative had happened to be hospitalized today, so he had specially come to visit. However, he didn't expect to encounter such a situation. Lawrence said, "The Smiths are certainly shameless, but isn't she a little too callous? No wonder she looks so unfeeling." Justin frowned and said, "Check if there's anything that can be done about her aunt's illness." This wasn't anything hard to find out. By the time they were in the car and on the way back to the hotel, he had already found out everything. Her condition is indeed hard to operate on. There are only 2 experts in the States who can do it, but the success rate is only 50%. Coincidentally, both experts are currently employed in our hospitals. Seeing that the icy Justin wasn't speaking, Lawrence couldn't help but say, "If Miss Smith knows what she's doing, then she'll use this as an opportunity to approach you." When the car arrived at Hotel Finest, as luck would have it, Justin spotted Nora getting off the cab. Additionally, when she noticed their car, she even stayed where she was and did not enter the hotel. Was she waiting for them? Nora had indeed spotted them. She didn't understand what was going on. She obviously had nothing to do with that 4 or 5-year-old child, but she simply couldn't help but feel uncomfortable the moment she thought of him being abused by his tutors. "They misunderstood and thought that I was pursuing him this morning. If I go over now, I'll really be seen as a stalker." Nora lowered her cat-like eyes slightly. From the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of Justin walking past her, surrounded by bodyguards. Nora suddenly spoke. She said, "I have something to say, Mr. Hunt." As expected, Justin stopped and looked at her with a deep gaze. His exquisite features exuded an aggressive air of heroism, and the mole at the corner of his eye gave off a feeling of slight interest. "What can I do for you, Miss Smith?" He had already given her a chance, so she would probably start begging him pitifully, right? In a slightly deep voice, Nora asked, "Are your son's tutors professional, Mr. Hunt?" She had only heard what the tutors said in the elevator and hadn't seen anything with her own eyes, so she had no way of judging whether or not their words were true. Thus, she merely gave him a subtle reminder. Justin frowned, however. Why was she keeping quiet about the doctors and talking about the tutors instead? Was it because she was too embarrassed to ask him about it, so she decided to talk about something else first? Justin was a straightforward man, so he went straight to the point. He asked, "Do you need me to introduce 2 doctors to you, Miss Smith? Do you want to speak with Dr. Lane or Dr. Wright?" Nora was confused. Although Dr. Lane and Dr. Wright were the most famous neurosurgeons in the States, the success rate was only 50% if they operated on her aunt. Why would she go to them? Besides, she was talking about the tutors. Why was he bringing up doctors? Nora replied impatiently, "No, I don't. Please show more concern toward your son instead if you're free." If the tutors really were abusing him, then the responsibility would lie only on Justin. He must have been neglecting the child. For some inexplicable reason, she was a little angry, as if it was her son that was being abused instead. She left immediately after saying that. Justin stared at her from the back with a slightly stunned expression, but he quickly came back to his senses. Anger welled up in him, and his countenance turned a little colder. Lawrence couldn't help but say, "I had thought Miss Smith was so indifferent to her aunt only because she was at her wit's end. I didn't expect that she really was leaving her to die. She's too heartless." Without surgery, her aunt was doomed. However, if she went through with the operation, then she would at least still have a 50% chance of survival. The choice was obvious. But that woman was actually so crazy and heartless and had rejected his kindness? Forget it. He would just take it that he had unnecessarily meddled into someone else's business and misjudged her. Justin entered the elevator with a sullen look. In the top-floor presidential suite, Cherry stealthily returned to the room. She was just about to enter the study when she turned and saw a stern-faced woman walking toward her with a ruler in her hand. She said viciously, "How can you bring yourself to loiter about elsewhere when you haven't finished your homework, Pete? Judging from how stupid and dull you look, you must have taken after your mother. Oh, wait, that isn't quite right because you're a little bastard without a mother. Hold out your hand. I'm going to teach you a good lesson today." Cherry was confused. How dare she insult her mother? And she was even hitting her brother? The soft little girl immediately transformed into the hot-tempered little girl from her gaming time. With her hands on her hips, she was about to hurl insults back at the tutor when the door suddenly opened. She turned to see her handsome father, who had the potential to be bossy, cool, affectionate, or reassuring, striding in. Cherry immediately forgot what happened just now. Her tiny form leaped forward as if she had wings, but it was at this moment that the tutor caught her by the arm. Justin took off his jacket after entering. As per usual, the first thing he did was to ask how his son was doing. "How is Pete today?" The tutor sighed. He's not doing his homework again. Because he didn't reinforce what he learned, he doesn't understand when we delve into more complicated topics. He's awfully stubborn and refuses to listen to us. As a result, his progress is now lagging behind his cousins by 2 semesters worth of lessons. A troubled Justin frowned when he heard her report. Although his son's IQ is excellent, he was introverted and autistic and had trouble expressing himself. He really didn't know how he should communicate with him. He walked up to Cherry, squatted down to face her, and asked patiently, "Why didn't you do your homework?" Wow, looking at him up close, Daddy looks even more handsome now. Cherry couldn't answer him for a moment there. Seeing her silent, the tutor secretly scoffed. He was indeed a dimwit that didn't cry, kick up a fuss, or know how to complain about others. Relieved, she started to spin more lies. "We're really at our wits' end, Mr. Hunt. We can't discipline or scold him, so your only option is to employ certain special methods of educating now." Cherry, who was currently captivated by her father's good looks, thought to herself, "What? They couldn't discipline or scold me?"
When I remember what you told me, everything feels brighter too. Little moments turn to sunshine just because they came from you.
She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 18, Teaching the Tutor a Lesson. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Just as Cherry was about to speak, Justin frowned and asked, "What kind of special methods?" The tutor sighed and replied, "Pete was born autistic." He doesn't like to talk, nor does he know how to communicate with others. If this goes on, it'll impede his development. I think you can consider either sending him to medical specialists for treatment or to a school for children with special needs." Her eyes shone after she spoke. Once Pete was sent to a school for children with special needs, he would be diagnosed as being mentally handicapped. With that, they would be able to ruin his future. Cherry was confused. That teacher was horrible. She looked at Justin. Should Daddy agree, she would stop seeing him as her father and would get Mommy to save Pete from their clutches. Justin's expression instantly darkened. He retorted fiercely, "Pete is fine. He doesn't need to attend a school for children with special needs. If you can't teach him, then I'll find someone else." "Lawrence." "Yes, sir." Justin ordered, "Settle her wages immediately. She doesn't need to come in anymore tomorrow." The tutor was shocked by his sudden wrath. Justin was usually very polite to them, which made her forget how domineering a man Justin really was. She had made a mistake. She shouldn't have said something like that. She should have taken it slow. Seeing that she was out of a job, in order to complete her mission, the tutor put on a sincere and earnest expression and said, "I am the top domestic tutor in the States, Mr. Hunt. My advice is undoubtedly in your son's best interests. Since you refuse to listen to the truth, then take it as if I didn't say anything. I enjoyed myself very much during my time with Pete. Goodbye." Her speech was very in line with what an exemplary teacher would say. Justin's anger faded a little and he said, "Give her an extra half a year's wages." The tutor was ecstatic. Half a year's wages were a lot of money, together with what that person had given her. Cherry, who was listening to them intently, was very satisfied. Daddy hadn't given up on Pete. He was indeed protective of him. However, he had been deceived by that teacher. As she watched the wicked teacher walk happily toward the door, Cherry's big grape-like eyes swiveled a little and she asked, "Daddy, am I a little bastard without a mother?" Justin was taken aback. He looked down suddenly to see his son looking up at him trustingly. His young, childish voice made what he said next sound particularly heartbreaking. "Am I really very stupid and dull? Did Mommy lower the quality of Daddy's genes?" Justin was stunned. His son rarely spoke this much. However, the content was especially shocking to him. He restrained his overwhelming fury and asked gently, "Who told you these things, Pete?" Cherry stretched out her arm and pointed her chubby little finger at the door. She did. At the door, the tutor's legs went limp the instant she felt Justin's murderous aura and anger. She said fearfully, "Stop spouting nonsense, Pete." Cherry hid behind Justin and hugged his leg. She stuck out her tongue at the tutor and said, "Please don't hit me again." "I'm sorry." The tutor was taken aback. Was this really that little dimwit who didn't talk? At the sight of how fearful his son looked, Justin didn't give the tutor a chance to explain anymore. He ordered, "Bring her out, Lawrence." "Yes, sir." because they were also afraid that someone would discover what was going on. Justin looked at the trembling woman kneeling on the ground and kicked her in the chest. Seriously. They didn't dare to do any kind of physical abuse worse than that because they were also afraid that someone would discover what was going on. Justin looked at the trembling woman kneeling on the ground and kicked her in the chest. The blow caused her to immediately cough up blood. His dark and overcast countenance made him look as if a demon. He ordered, "Throw her out." Lawrence's heart trembled upon sensing Justin's fury. However, even he himself was furious, let alone Justin, who had always loved and doted on Pete. It was just that his way of expressing it wasn't quite right. Justin returned to the room. When he saw Cherry's tiny little form sitting on the sofa and playing with the toy car, his heart tightened with guilt. Pete had been with him since he was an infant. He had personally nursed him and changed his diapers, but even until he was 1.5 years old, he didn't speak at all. When they saw a doctor, he was told that Pete had slight congenital autism. Grandma said that it was because the boy didn't have a mother and thus had no sense of security. They mustn't have him, a grown man, taking care of him anymore, so she had arranged for babysitters, family doctors, and tutors for him. As Pete slowly grew up and became able to have short conversations with people, it convinced him that Grandma was right. Pete was a stubborn boy and always went against him. He often made him so angry that he almost wanted to give him a good thrashing. Despite that, he continued to think that this was a phase that all normal children went through. That was until that incident last week. It was all his fault. Justin walked over slowly. He sat beside Cherry, softened his voice, and said, "Daddy is sorry, Pete." Cherry stretched out her little arms and hugged her handsome father. "Everything will be fine as long as you can acknowledge your mistakes and turn over a new leaf, Daddy." Justin sighed. Then he said seriously, "We won't engage any more tutors. I'll personally teach you in the future." The happy Cherry was instantly petrified. What? She hated having to do homework the most. "Help, Pete." Downstairs. When Nora returned to the room, she found her daughter sitting on the sofa and looking at her obediently instead of playing games like she usually did. She walked over and kissed Pete on the forehead. "You're so well behaved today, baby." The soft lips pressed against his forehead, causing Pete to freeze. Yet at the same time, a sense of anticipation also arose in him. Mommy's so soft and gentle. He looked at Mommy longingly and subconsciously stood up and followed after her. As he did, he suddenly found his mother stopping and looking at him with a half-amused smile. "Are you intending to take a bath together with Mommy, Cherry?" Only then did Pete realize with a start that he had followed her into the bathroom in the master bedroom. He was about to retreat, but Nora stooped over and picked him up. She said, "Forget it, let's bathe you first." Alarm bells rang in Pete's head. Wouldn't his identity as a boy be revealed if she were to bathe him?
In the pale morning light, I take a deeper breath, carrying that smile within me as a new day softly begins.
She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 19. My brother looks just like me. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Pete blushed. No, it's fine, Mommy." Nora chuckled softly and said, "Cherry's a big girl now." Pete ran away in a hurry after Nora let go of him. He stood outside the door to the bedroom and listened to the movements inside. The sound of running water, the sound of someone in the bath, and the sound of Mommy walking around in slippers after she was done bathing. After confirming that Mommy was dressed, he opened the door and saw her lying on the bed. With her eyes closed, she said, "Mommy has a very important operation in 2 days, Cherry. I need a crazy amount of sleep for the next few days, so I'll go to bed first, all right?" "Okay, Mommy." His sister had told him before that Mommy had poor health and that her hobby was sleeping. She was usually either asleep or dealing with troublesome issues so that she could sleep. Therefore, he mustn't disturb Mommy. 2 minutes later, when he heard steady breathing coming from where the bed was, Pete tiptoed over to his mother. His tiny little form climbed onto the bed. Then, he found a spot in Nora's arms and curled up there. Before he knew it, he had fallen into deep sleep while listening to her heartbeat. How wonderful. He also had a mother now. As a result, he didn't see the SOS messages from Cherry on the cell phone in his pocket. Help, Pete. Let's exchange our positions again, Pete. Sob, I don't love Daddy anymore. Downstairs. Cherry took advantage of the opportunity while Justin was pouring a glass of water to send another text message to her brother on her cell phone. When she saw that he still wasn't replying, she could only give up and start tackling her assignments. She bit her pen and stared at the textbook, her face all wrinkled as she frowned. She, who had grown up abroad, was still at the literacy development stage. She couldn't understand the questions on the papers at all. Justin sat next to her when he returned. It had been half a year since he last tutored his son. As such, he didn't know how far their current progress was. He pointed at the simplest question and asked, "Do you know how to solve this?" Cherry's big eyes were completely blank. Justin fell silent for a moment. Then he flipped back to syllabus from half a year ago. "What about this?" Cherry shook her head hard. Justin stared at her. He wanted to ask Pete why he couldn't solve the question now when he could do it half a year ago. Also, was he really shaking his head when he hadn't even read the question? Cherry wordlessly suggested, "Why don't we learn about history instead, Daddy? I'm very knowledgeable in that." All right. Justin flipped open the textbook. Who's the first president of the United States? Cherry's eyes lit up. She raised her hand and said, "I know this." Justin breathed a sigh of relief. His son had fallen behind in his mathematics, but it would also do if he was doing well in his history classes. As soon as the thought formed, he heard her yell, "Tom Cruise." "It's George Washington." Cherry blinked. "Oh, right, I must have remembered it wrongly. Next question, please, Daddy." Which American politician was assassinated in 1963? Leonardo DiCaprio. Cherry immediately answered. Justin took a deep breath and told himself not to get mad. His son had just started talking a little more. He mustn't lose his temper. He decided to try again. Who invented the light bulb? Full of confidence, Cherry answered, "Keanu Reeves." As Justin looked at his son's usually stern countenance that seemed more alive and animated today, he couldn't help yelling, "Peter Hunt." Cherry looked up, her expression as though she was eagerly seeking praise. "Aren't I great, Daddy? There's still a lot more that I know." Justin was perplexed. But when he saw how his son looked, he immediately reined his temper in. The tutors were the ones who had taught him all these, so what was he losing his temper at the kid for? He would just reward those two tutors even handsomely. Justin said glumly, "Let's continue tomorrow." "Okay, Daddy." Cherry heaved a huge sigh of relief. Seeing Lawrence poking his head into the room every now and then because he probably had something to talk to her father about, she carefully climbed down from the chair and said, "I'm going off to play now." Justin rubbed his temples as he watched her run off. Lawrence entered the room. With a complicated look, he said, "Pete seems to be doing worse than how the tutor had put it. If this goes on, he'll probably fall to the last place in the year-end assessment, right? Do you want to quickly contact a few other tutors? There's still time until the end of the year." The Hunts held assessments for the children at the end of each year. Pete always took top place in the past. That was how he became known among outsiders for having a high IQ. Yet his grades had deteriorated so badly in just half a year. No wonder it was said that even though children had good memory, they were also prone to forgetting. Once they stopped learning, their grades would suffer immediately. Flames of fury flared in Justin's eyes. He closed his eyes and pondered for a long time before he finally sighed and said, "Forget it. Let's not force him to do it anymore." It was exactly because he had placed too much emphasis on education in the past that he always fell out with his son. But when he saw how he smiled and how he cried and kicked up a fuss, it was then that he realized that his son's mental health was more important than anything else. Even if his son were to really forget everything that he had learned and take the last place in examinations every time, he could just live from day to day in the future. He would pave the way for his son's future. Justin, who had always been bold and resolute when facing the unscrupulous commercial world, hesitated for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you find Pete very different today?" The abuse had been ongoing for a very long time, but his son had never once mentioned anything. Yet not only had he spoken up today, but his personality seemed to also have become a lot more cheerful. For some reason, Justin suddenly thought of what that woman had said downstairs. How did she know that the tutors were problematic? Had Pete been keeping in contact with her all this time? A pondering Lawrence also said, "Could Miss Smith have counseled Pete?" Speaking of this, she's really not a simple woman. After all, so many women have tried to gain Pete's favor in order to get near to you, but all of them have been unsuccessful. Lawrence couldn't even keep count of how many of Justin's suitors he had had to handle in the past anymore. He thought for a while and asked, "Do you want to consider giving Miss Smith a chance to get near you if she really has a positive influence on Pete?" Justin hesitated for a while before he asked, "What is she doing now?" A hesitant look appeared on Lawrence's countenance again. When the cleaners went to clean the room just now, they heard from the nanny that she's asleep, and she forbade them from disturbing them. Her aunt's life is still in limbo, yet she can still bring herself to sleep. A person who could do that was too unfeeling. Justin's expression darkened. Don't let her make contact with Pete so often anymore. Yes, sir. Lawrence wanted to say more, but Justin suddenly noticed that the little fellow had fallen asleep on the sofa. He gestured to Lawrence to keep quiet. Then he walked over and picked up Cherry, intending to carry her into the bedroom. A dazed Cherry suddenly placed her arms around his neck and said, "Mommy, I've found my elder brother. He looks just like me." Justin paused and frowned.
A slow and gentle wind brushes softly against my heart, and I hope I can keep loving these shifting days as they are.
She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 20. Let's have a date, Mommy Daddy. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Justin stared at the young child in his arms. Her murmur reached his ears. It seemed like she was calling out for her mother. The light in his eyes dimmed. Pete rarely asked about his mother. But as it turned out, to his son, his mother was such an important figure. He lowered his eyes, hiding the complex emotions within. Then, he carried Cherry into the bedroom, took off her shoes, and tucked her in. He gazed at his son's young, sleeping visage for a long time before he quietly exited the bedroom. The next day. "Sorry, I fell asleep last night. Did Daddy scold you last night, Cherry?" Cherry lay on the bed and sent her brother a voice message back. "Nope, because even though I don't know much about mathematics, I'm awesome at history. Daddy was so moved that he canceled my homework." Pete believed her. He said, "Okay, don't forget our plans today." Cherry was about to reply when the door opened. Justin pushed the door open and walked in to see his son on the bed with his butt perched high into the air while texting on his cell phone. At the sight of him, his son turned off the cell phone screen in a slight panic. Then, with a guilty conscience, he blinked with his big cute eyes and exclaimed, "You look even more handsome today, Daddy." Justin couldn't help but smile when he heard the little fellow complimenting him. "You're a handsome fellow, too." "No, that won't do." Cherry corrected him seriously and said, "Handsome is used to describe boys. I'm going to be pretty when I grow up." Justin was perplexed. Cherry flipped the quilt aside and climbed out of the bed nimbly. Then, she held his large hand with her own small one and asked, "Wanna have breakfast, Daddy?" Cherry Pit is really hungry." Justin glanced at her hesitantly again. Grandpa was the one that had named him Peter in hopes that he would be as resilient and down-to-earth as a rock. How did that become Cherry Pit instead? It sounded a little sissy. He took Cherry to the dining room. The presidential suite was bigger than 5,000 square feet. It had 4 bedrooms, 2 studies, a living room, a lounge, a gym, a kitchen, and a dining room. While they were eating, Justin instructed, "Get the family doctor here." As the doctor stood there, he saw his employer's expression changing again and again before he hesitantly asked, "Is it possible to tell a 5-year-old child's sexual orientation?"
Gentle morning breeze touches the curtain softly in the quiet air that still feels sleepy. I think of your easy smile and just that little memory brightens something in my chest. It doesn't have to be special, your smile alone is enough to make me like today a little more than before. Your smile lightens my whole day, spreading like a small warm glow through the quiet part of my heart. These calm and tender moments set the rhythm of my morning. Good vibes, good life, that's how the day begins for me. Even without saying a word, a single soft smile is plenty. It makes me believe somehow that I can get through anything. Even the feelings shaped like gray skies fade gently into something clear. Your presence feels like a small and steady light, and that brightness rests quietly inside of me. Your smile lightens my whole day, a modest, gentle shimmer that settles warmly in my heart. With just one deeper breath, today begins to move with ease. Good vibes, good life, you're the reason it feels that way. On days when my feelings waver, or mornings that don't start well, thinking of your easy smile helps everything fall into place. That steady warmth of yours has saved me many times, and I hope someday I can be a little light for you too. That quiet wish has started to bloom softly inside me. With each gentle kindness we share, our days grow warm and soft. Your smile lightens my whole day, not with anything grand, but simply by being there, sharing the warmth between us. We begin another morning. Good vibes,
She becomes
good
glamorous after the
life.
engagement annulment. Chapter 20. Let's have a date, Mommy Daddy. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Justin stared at the young child in his arms. Her murmur reached his ears. It seemed like she was calling out for her mother. The light in his eyes dimmed. Pete rarely asked about his mother. But as it turned out, to his son, his mother was such an important figure. He lowered his eyes, hiding the complex emotions within. Then, he carried Cherry into the bedroom, took off her shoes, and tucked her in. He gazed at his son's young, sleeping visage for a long time before he quietly exited the bedroom. The next day. "Sorry, I fell asleep last night. Did Daddy scold you last night, Cherry?" Cherry lay on the bed and sent her brother a voice message back. "Nope, because even though I don't know much about mathematics, I'm awesome at history. Daddy was so moved that he canceled my homework." Pete believed her. He said, "Okay, don't forget our plans today." Cherry was about to reply when the door opened. Justin pushed the door open and walked in to see his son on the bed with his butt perched high into the air while texting on his cell phone. At the sight of him, his son turned off the cell phone screen in a slight panic. Then, with a guilty conscience, he blinked with his big cute eyes and exclaimed, "You look even more handsome today, Daddy." Justin couldn't help but smile when he heard the little fellow complimenting him. "You're a handsome fellow, too." "No, that won't do." Cherry corrected him seriously and said, "Handsome is used to describe boys. I'm going to be pretty when I grow up." Justin was perplexed. Cherry flipped the quilt aside and climbed out of the bed nimbly. Then, she held his large hand with her own small one and asked, "Wanna have breakfast, Daddy?" Cherry Pit is really hungry." Justin glanced at her hesitantly again. Grandpa was the one that had named him Peter in hopes that he would be as resilient and down-to-earth as a rock. How did that become Cherry Pit instead? It sounded a little sissy. He took Cherry to the dining room. The presidential suite was bigger than 5,000 square feet. It had 4 bedrooms, 2 studies, a living room, a lounge, a gym, a kitchen, and a dining room. While they were eating, Justin instructed, "Get the family doctor here." Cherry ate slow, so Justin got the nanny to look after her after he finished. Then, he entered the study with the family doctor who had hurried over. As the doctor stood there, he saw his employer's expression changing again and again before he hesitantly asked, "Is it possible to tell a 5-year-old child's sexual orientation?" During the history quiz the day before, all the names that his son had mentioned were good-looking and attractive men. Moreover, his son's wish to become pretty and how he had called himself, Cherry Pit, this morning was rather worrisome. Was Chester being a bad influence on him? When the family doctor saw how serious he was, he replied solemnly, "One's sexual orientation is generally already decided at birth. But if you have concerns about this, I can prepare a test for Pete." "Okay, get the test ready." After giving the doctor instructions, Justin exited the study. The moment he returned to the dining room, he saw Chester and his son's arms slung across each other's backs while they spoke with each other in low voices. His face immediately sank. "Why didn't you log on to the game last night?" Chester was stuffing bread into his mouth and speaking with a muffled voice when he suddenly felt a chilly aura coming toward him. He turned his head slowly to see the tyrant standing behind him. The look in his eyes was as if he wanted to kill him. Chester was so frightened that he jumped up from the chair. "Are you okay, Justin?" Justin retracted his scrutinizing gaze and walked in between Chester and Cherry. He said, "No one's living next door. You can move in there instead." Chester was confused. Why was he sensing acute disdain from the tyrant? When Cherry was full, she walked over and put her arms around Justin's leg. Then, she looked up and asked adorably, "Can you accompany me to the movies today, Daddy?" Just as Justin was about to refuse, his son wheedled, "Come on, Daddy. Pretty please." That tone. Justin bent over and picked Cherry up. "Don't plead with others so lightly, Pete." Cherry's big round eyes blinked. "Will you go then?" "All right." In order to make it up to his son, he had already postponed all his work and meetings today. Since he wanted to go to the movies, he would accompany him. The two picked an afternoon screening for a cartoon film. Before leaving, Cherry secretly sent a message to Pete. "All set, Pete. What about you?" Pete replied very quickly, "We've already set off." How could Nora possibly reject the request? She was always sleeping, so she was already spending less time with her child than other mothers. Thus, as long as the request wasn't too much, she agreed to every one of Cherry's requests. As she had to perform surgery the next day, she had slept all the way until 2 p.m. Then, she took Pete to the movie theater while yawning. At the entrance of the movie theater, the corners of her lips spasmed a little as she looked at Pete. "It's just a movie, Cherry. Is this really necessary?" Pete had a mask on. "It's to prevent being infected by contagious diseases." Nora held her forehead with her hand. "And the shades." Pete pushed them up a little and replied reticently, "It looks good." "If you say so." After Nora bought some popcorn and cola, she took his hand and led him into the movie theater. After taking their assigned seats, Pete took out his cell phone and sent a text message to his sister. "Are you here yet?" Cherry was currently following Justin into the movie theater sulkily. She wanted popcorn, but her father had adamantly refused to buy her some, saying that it was unhealthy. He was horrible. Justin intensely disliked large movie theaters like this. Not only were there a lot of people, but the air was also very dirty. But because his son wanted the experience, it wasn't quite appropriate for him to book the whole theater, either. He entered the cinema sullenly with Cherry in his arms. When he reached the seats assigned to them based on the tickets that his son had bought online, he immediately spotted the woman already seated there. The theater was very dark, but she was so fair that it dazzled one's eyes. Her eyes were lidded and she seemed very sleepy. Her arms were comfortably crossed and she was currently asleep. Justin's expression darkened. He had been wondering why his son suddenly wanted to come to the movies and even bought tickets. So, in the end, it was all still that woman's scheme. He wanted to turn around and leave, but when he thought of his son's mental health, he suppressed his impatience and placed Cherry between the two of them in the end. He would never give her a chance to get close to him again. The two cuties, who both had masks on, exchanged a look with each other. How were Daddy and Mommy going to fall in love with each other if they didn't sit together? The movie started at this point. The theme song of Frozen started to play. With just a glance, the movie instantly grabbed Cherry's attention, and she started to watch it with her eyes widened. Half an hour later, Cherry suddenly smelled popcorn. Engrossed in the cartoon, she subconsciously nudged Nora and said, "Popcorn, Mommy." Nora, who was dozing off, let out a dazed "okay." Then, she picked up a piece of popcorn, took off Cherry's mask, and stuffed it into her mouth. Pete was astounded.
Like a breeze passing through, my feelings shift and move. The worries I held yesterday feel a little farther away today, and as I slowly change, I begin to treat myself kindly. The waves of my emotions gently light my way ahead. Quiet days and restless.
She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 21, The Operation. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. The expression of Justin, who wasn't interested in the movie, instantly darkened after he saw what she had done. Instead of feeding her own daughter, she was feeding his son. If even something like this wasn't her attempt at trying to please him and pursue him, then how else was he supposed to interpret her actions? Upon sensing a cold aura coming from the side, Nora slowly opened her eyes and looked over. When confronted with Justin's deep and dark eyes, which also had a bit of a sharp look in them, she was taken aback for a moment. Was she dreaming? Otherwise, why was she seeing Justin in the movie theater? Her sleepiness disappeared instantly. She lowered her eyes lazily and wondered, is this a coincidence? Or is Justin here because he suspects that I'm anti and has come to sound me out? Things had gotten troublesome. She wanted to pretend that she didn't see him, but her instincts told her that the man seemed to still be staring at her at the moment. On top of that, he had a rather hostile look in his eyes. Nora turned to the side and gave a perfunctory greeting. "What a coincidence, Mr. Hunt." A coincidence? The look on Justin's face turned darker. Never mind that we're watching the same movie, but even our seats just so happen to be next to each other's? What a coincidence, indeed. Nora was puzzled. Why did he sound so sarcastic? She frowned. "What do you mean by that, Mr. Hunt?" Justin replied coldly, "I told you, I hate it when people try to approach me by using my son. Did you forget what I said, Miss Smith?" Nora was astonished. He was misunderstanding her again and again. Had he had enough yet? Nora slowly retracted her gaze and looked in front of her seriously. She said, "You are indeed an attractive man, Mr. Hunt, but you shouldn't be too narcissistic either. Men like you who look prettier than women aren't my type." Justin sneered, "Your actions are so blatant, Miss Smith, yet you're still trying to hide your intentions? Let me make things clear, I'm not interested in you." If you have the time to seduce me, why don't you think about how to cure your aunt's illness instead? His words angered Nora. That man must be sick in the head. She said coldly, "Don't worry, you needn't bother yourself with my aunt's illness at all." When he heard how she glossed over the topic, Justin became even angrier. He was about to retort when the moviegoer with their children seated in the row in front of them suddenly turned around and snapped, "Hey, we're in the middle of a movie here. Can the two of you refrain from quarreling with your other halves in here?" Justin was bewildered. Nora was bewildered. The movie theater was pitch dark. Justin didn't know why, but he didn't immediately feel any disgust when someone else misunderstood him and Nora as a married couple. Instead, a dazed feeling, not easily detectable, arose in him. The moviegoer added earnestly, "Can't the two of you, as husband and wife, control yourselves a little better in front of the children? You're scaring them." Nora looked at where the moviegoer was pointing and looked down to see Cherry, who was sitting there with a mask on and only her eyes exposed. Justin bent over and picked her up. He said with displeasure, "This is the last time I'm warning you, Miss Smith. The next time I see you approaching my son, I'm not holding back." He strode away right after saying that. Nora was bewildered. She glanced at the other side, finding herself mystified when she saw Pete there. It seemed like her hand had gone the other side instead when she was feeding Cherry just now, right? While she was hesitating, Pete held her hand silently and said, "Let's go too, Mommy." He hereby declared that the first date had failed. When they returned to the hotel, it was already 4 in the afternoon. Nora went to sleep again. The next day's operation would last 7 or 8 hours. If she didn't get enough sleep, she wouldn't have enough strength and energy to support her through it. Pete, who was next to her, anxiously sent a text message to Cherry. "How's it going over there, Cherry?" Meanwhile, on the top floor, Cherry was facing off with Justin. Justin ordered, "You're forbidden from making contact with that woman in the future." Cherry's large eyes were full of grievances as she asked, "Why?" Knowing that it wasn't right to speak badly about other people in front of children, Justin didn't answer right away. However, Lawrence, who was next to him, answered, "It's because she's someone that just sits on the sidelines and watches without doing anything even though her aunt is sick. On top of that, she's even going to the movies. That woman is too cold-blooded." Cherry panicked and retorted angrily, "Mommy isn't cold-blooded. She's someone that values relationships the most. She'll definitely save Grandaunt." Justin's expression darkened. Never mind that she was cajoling his son to call her mommy, but he's even addressing her aunt as Grandaunt now? "You're a bad daddy. You can't say that about her. I'm ignoring you." Cherry pouted aggrievedly. With tears in her eyes, she ran straight into the bedroom. Justin clenched his fists angrily. He had been getting along well with his son today, yet now he had actually made his son cry because of that woman. At this point, Lawrence came over and said excitedly, "Mr. Hunt, we've received news that Auntie is coming to the hospital in town for an operation. Observers are allowed during the operation. I've asked for a spot, and I plan to send someone there to stand guard. We'll catch hold of her this time for sure." Justin thought for a while, then looked at the bedroom. At last, he said, "I will go in person." The next day, Nora didn't go to the operating room after entering the hospital. She went to the ward to visit her aunt first, intending to comfort her. As soon as she entered, a worried Lisa came over. "Nora, is the message you sent me yesterday saying that Mom will undergo surgery today true?" Nora nodded. "Yeah." Next to them, Angela sneered, "You're such an unlearned piece of trash, Nora. Do you know that Aunt Irene's tumor is located in a very risky area? It's impossible for ordinary surgeons to operate on her." Nora looked at her. "I know that. Since you do, then why did you still look for someone to operate on her? You're obviously taking her life lightly." Angela looked at Will and Lisa and said, "I've already shown Dr. Larson Aunt Irene's CT scan a long time ago, and even he is hesitant to take on the task. Do you really think she can get a better doctor than Dr. Larson?" When Will heard this, he asked somewhat hesitantly, "Tell me the truth, Nora. How high is the operation's success rate?" Before Nora could even reply, Angela scoffed and said, I'll tell you the truth. There are only 2 doctors in the States that can achieve a success rate of 50% in this operation. Apart from them, everyone else can only achieve 10%. If you don't undergo the operation, Aunt Irene can still live for another 2 months, but if you do, there's a 90% chance that she won't be able to come out of the operating room alive today. Her words frightened Lisa so badly that blood drained from her face. Isn't there a better doctor? Oh, there is. Angela said, there's Dr. Anti, the top surgeon in the world. To her, there is no surgery that cannot be done. She can achieve a 100% success rate. Unfortunately, Dr. Anti is currently abroad and a great distance away from here. Even so many of the wealthy and powerful can't find her, so how can ordinary people like you possibly convince her to do it? The ward was dead silent. Just as Angela was all smug and both Will and Lisa had lost all hope, the 3 suddenly heard Nora's low voice. In that case, do you know who the doctor I got is?
This winter morning, watching the drifting snow, I imagine what the day might bring. Wrapped in this warm and mellow sound, I step forward once again. In quiet, simple days, I kept my feelings tucked away. Thoughts I couldn't turn into words. Gently moved like tiny waves, I stayed inside a smaller world, watching everything in shades of gray. Then you appeared beside me with a soft voice and gentle eyes. You carried in a light I'd never known, and slowly opened up my heart. Love is a sweet melody. It colors the world around me. The part of me that once looked down.
She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 22, Anti. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Angela said sarcastically, "Did you not understand what I was saying? Unless it's Dr. Anti, the situation won't change, no matter who you've gotten over." Scaring a patient before their operation and making them nervous and full of distrust toward their doctor held zero benefits for the operation. Nora had come over intending to comfort her aunt right from the start. At the sight of their pale faces, she was just about to utter the name, Anti, when Irene suddenly said, "I trust you, Nora. Let's get ready for the operation." Nora paused. Angela said sharply, "What a fool. Are you also in a hurry to die?" Lisa became even more nervous. "Mom." Irene gave her a wry smile and said, "How many doctors have your father and you approached for this operation?" No one dares to do it because none of them wants to be held responsible. It's hard no matter who does it anyway, so why bother so much about who the operating surgeon is? She would take the risk. And see if God also thinks that this should be the end of her life. She looked at Lisa and Will and said, "Remember this, Will, Lisa. No matter whether the operation succeeds or not, this is what I've chosen. It has nothing to do with Nora." Nora lowered her gaze, her heart warmed. The door to the ward opened and a nurse came in. "Mrs. Black, we'll be transferring you to the operating room now." Outside the operating room. After waiting for Irene to be transferred into the operating room, Nora decided to head off to make pre-operation preparations. However, the moment she turned, she heard Angela's voice. "Where are you going, Nora?" "I get it now. You must be having a guilty conscience, so you're too scared to face what's going to happen, right? You're afraid that the Blacks will blame you for Aunt Irene's death when the hospital staff brings her dead body out later." You can't go. You have to stay here and take responsibility for Aunt Irene's life. Nora paused and slowly said, I have something on. Angela scoffed and said, what do you have that's more important than Aunt Irene's life? Why are you so cold-blooded? Will, who was listening to the conversation between the two, clenched his fists. His eyes were filled with fierce disappointment. No matter whether the operation succeeded or not, he wasn't going to cast any blame on Nora. But as his wife's most beloved niece, couldn't she even stay with her during the surgery? At this time, a nurse came up and said, can I get her family members to sign the medical liability waiver form, please? Will's hand trembled at the sight of the surgical consent form and the liability waiver form she handed over. With her eyes red, Lisa's voice trembled as she asked, what does this mean? Angela stepped forward, her face still sporting a relaxed and happy smile. Obviously, she wasn't concerned at all about the life of the person in the operating room. She said sarcastically, it means that the doctor won't have to take any responsibility even if he causes the death of the patient during the surgery. Aunt Irene's surgery is such a difficult one. The doctors aren't fools. They'll definitely ask for liability waiver form to be signed. Lisa's face turned pale with fright. Angela was extremely satisfied. Her eyes swiveled a little and she grabbed the consent form from the nurse. Then, she looked at the section naming the chief surgeon at the bottom as she said, I want to see who this surgeon is, so brave to actually undertake Aunt Irene's operation. The operation was bound to fail, but that surgeon had agreed to operate on her aunt, thereby potentially ruining her grand plans to usurp the company. She wanted them ruined. There was a sinister look in Angela's eyes, but when she saw who the chief surgeon was the next moment, she suddenly froze. How could this be? Aunt? Beside her, Lisa exclaimed, is this the top surgeon in the world that you guys were talking about just now? What? Will also exclaimed, let me take a look. As the two of them stared at the chief surgeon's name, their eyes started to light up again. Will looked at Nora in surprise and asked, Nora, how did you manage to get Dr. Anti to do the operation? Nora cast her eyes down and randomly made up a story. She said, Anti likes challenging operations, so I tried emailing them Aunt Irene's CT scans. I didn't expect them to agree. Will's eyes turned red. I've misunderstood you, Nora. It's okay. Nora said dispassionately, but I really do have something up, so I'm going off first. The shocked Angela was still frozen in place even after she left, and she watched Lisa and Will sign the forms. Will even cried because of how ecstatic he was, and she felt as if she had been made to eat her words. Hurry up, Dr. Anti has already arrived. Several doctors from the hospital strode into the operating room. They were representatives that the dean had carefully selected to observe Anti's operation. This was a rare opportunity for them. Dr. Larson, the head of the Department of Neurology, happened to be among them. When he was about to enter the operating room, he suddenly caught a glimpse of Angela and he stopped immediately. He called out, Angela, is that you? Angela came back to her senses and greeted him. Dr. Larson. Dr. Larson was Angela's professor at the School of Medicine in college. He asked, why are you here? Angela hurriedly answered, my aunt's the patient. Dr. Larson's eyes lit up right away and he beckoned to her. The two went over to the side and he asked, what's your family's relationship with Anti? Angela replied, my aunt is in serious condition, so the operation's a challenging one. Practically none of the doctors in the States are capable of performing it, so I tried emailing Anti. Unexpectedly, she really agreed to take on the operation. Can you bring me in to observe the surgery too? A scheming look filled her eyes. It was that damned fatty who had sent the email, but how would Anti know who the sender was anyway? It is undoubtedly an honor to be able to observe Anti's surgery. Enlightened, Dr. Larson said, so you're the one that got Anti over. You've made a huge contribution to the hospital. Of course, I can bring you in. Angela hurriedly followed after Dr. Larson. Among those here to observe, apart from the well-known specialists in the hospital, there were only a few promising doctoral students. She was the only undergraduate there. If she became a well-known doctor, then Anthony definitely wouldn't find her beneath him anymore. Nora slipped into the operating room through the side door. As soon as she entered, she spotted Lily, her surgical assistant. She had flown into the States overnight in order to help out today. In order to keep their identities secret, the two of them were the only ones in the dressing room. Lily put on the surgical gown for her. After completing the disinfection procedures, they entered a room in the second hallway. There, they ran into the doctors present to observe the operation. They had changed relatively quickly and were currently crowding around Angela and chatting. To think you actually managed to get over Angela. I heard from Dr. Larson just now that he intends to get the hospital and college to focus on training you. Wow, that's so awesome. You'll definitely become a well-known surgeon in only a few years. What an honor it is for undergraduates to observe Antai's surgery. Angela, who was surrounded by them, felt as if she was on cloud 9. At the sight of Antai, she hurriedly walked up to her and said, "Hello, Dr. Antai. I'm the one that sent you that email. Thank you for operating on my aunt. I really look up to you. Can you give me a chance to become a postgraduate student under you?" Nora was bewildered.
Even when the breeze moves forward, your warmth follows in its way. With that brightness in my heart, I step into the day.
She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 23, Eating Her Words. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Nora had a mask, goggles, and surgical cap on, so she was totally covered from head to toe. No one could see what she looked like at all. Therefore, none of them saw the mocking smile at the corners of her lips. She really didn't expect her younger sister to be this shameless. Had it been before, she might have considered being a little nicer, but now. Nora suddenly smiled and said, "Oh, so you're Nora Smith?" She had deliberately lowered her voice, which made her voice, which was already deep, sound even deeper as if she had a sore throat. As soon as she said that, the whole operating room suddenly fell silent. Everyone, including Dr. Larson, looked at Angela. Angela's smile froze, and a cold sweat broke out on her forehead. Did that damned fatty actually sign off the email? Dr. Larson's expression turned sullen and he asked, "What's the meaning of this, Angela?" Angela braced herself and started to make up a story. She said, "I'm sorry, Professor Antai, Dr. Larson. I was afraid that Professor Antai would reject my request, so I was too embarrassed to use my real name and ended up using my sister's." Dr. Larson's expression mellowed. "I see. Gee." All of her sister's ingenuity had been put into use here instead. Nora cast her eyes down. As she walked to the operating room, she asked seemingly curiously, "How did you get hold of my email address?" Angela, who had just heaved a sigh of relief, was bewildered. Why would anyone ask about this? Besides, her aunt was the patient. Her claim that she had sent the email made logical sense, so there was no need to press the issue at all. She wiped off the perspiration that had formed on her forehead again and stammered, I asked a friend for it." Nora continued her questions as if nothing had happened. She asked, "Can you tell me what my email address is?" Angela abruptly stood still, the exposed parts of her face already pale. Her reaction was too telling. A red-faced Dr. Larson reprimanded, "What's the matter with you, Angela? Were you the one who sent the email or not?" Angela could only tell the truth. And no, it wasn't me. Having reached the doors to the operating room, Nora opened them. Before entering, she heard Dr. Larson shouting angrily behind her. To think you could bring yourself to say something like that in order to observe the operation. A student of poor character and upbringing like you is not worthy of observing Antai's operation. Get out. In the operating room, Irene clenched her fists nervously as she laid on the cold bed and stared at the ceiling. She turned her head toward the door when she heard it opening. When her gentle eyes met the doctor's, she swallowed nervously. She knew that she would probably die on the operating table today. A 10% success rate was too low. Just as a wry smile appeared on her lips, the doctor suddenly came over. In a low voice, she said, "I'm Aunt Irene. Go ahead and sleep. When you wake up, you'll be all fine." Irene's eyes widened suddenly. Past the goggles, a pair of familiar cat-like eyes entered her sight. On the top floor of Hotel Finest. Daddy's a bad man who misunderstood Mommy. I'm not talking to you. In the bedroom, Cherry hugged the one and only plush toy in the pile of toys and turned her back to the door as she sat in the corner. The big and tall Justin stood at the door. The little fellow had such a bad temper. She had been ignoring him since the day before, and she kept staring at him accusingly with her big and teary eyes, making it seem as if he had done some terribly heinous things. Lawrence was in the room trying to coax her. He said, "Don't sit here anymore, Pete. Why don't we go over to where the toys are?" Cherry raised her head and curled her lip as she said, "There are only cars and airplanes there. It's no fun. Why aren't there any Barbie dolls?" Justin's jaw tightened. He looked at the family doctor and asked in a low voice, "Is the test ready?" "Yes, it is." After answering, the family doctor walked into the bedroom cheerfully and said in a cajoling voice, "Why don't we do a little test, Pete? I'll give you a Barbie doll when we're done." Cherry, who was completely unaware that this would put her brother in a rather unfortunate situation, immediately nodded. "Okay." Seeing his son happily following the doctor and walking out of the bedroom, worry appeared on Justin's countenance. The test was over very quickly. A short half an hour later, Cherry bounced out of the study with the Barbie doll that the family doctor had rewarded her with and ran past Justin into the bedroom without looking anywhere else. While looking at her from the back, Justin, who had an indescribable expression on his face, entered the study and asked, "Are the results out?" The family doctor coughed and replied, "Yes, it is. Please be mentally prepared, Mr. Hunt." Justin clenched his fists tightly. The family doctor said tactfully, "It is obvious that Pete pays more attention to men than women. The test has shown that he thinks he's a little princess." Bam! Justin slammed his fist on the desk. He, who had always faced all the dirty deception and trickery in the commercial world with skill and ease, actually found himself feeling a little helpless. What was he to do about this? The sound startled the family doctor. It was only when he looked back and saw Lawrence beckoning him at the door that he finally walked out of the room. After waiting for another half an hour, Lawrence said, "It's time, Mr. Hunt." He had already asked around. Auntie's operation would take 7 hours. The timing would be just nice if they went over now. Justin stood up solemnly. "Let's go." He glanced at his son when he was leaving the room, combing her doll's hair. He hummed a little song as he nimbly braided the doll's hair. Then he picked a set of clothes and started to change the doll into it. He tried, again and again, to keep his temper under control. At last, he said, "Daddy's going out for a while, Pete. Let's play with the airplanes together when I'm back." Cherry ignored him. Justin then said, "I'll buy you a Barbie when I come back in the evening." Cherry's eyes brightened and she looked at him eagerly. However, she forced herself to look away. She said, Cherry Pitt doesn't want a Barbie doll. I want Mommy." Sob, she had already changed places with Pete for 2 days. She missed Mommy. What the heck was Cherry Pitt? Justin, who felt as if his heart had been pierced by a million arrows, left the hotel broken-hearted together with Lawrence and headed to the hospital in town. In order to ensure that he could catch Auntie, Justin decided to enter the operating room. While he was changing, next to him, Lawrence said, "This is a psychological issue, Mr. Hunt. How about we ask Miss Smith to come over and talk to Pete?" Justin cast his eyes down. The thought of Nora irritated him even more. When he came in to change, he had noticed that her aunt was still in the middle of her operation, yet she was nowhere in sight. A woman like that. He rejected the suggestion again. No, it isn't necessary. Even if his son wasn't normal, at least he wasn't a heartless and callous person. After leaving him a cold reply, he pushed the door open and entered the operating room. Inside the operating room, all the lights were focused on the operating table. His eyes locked directly onto the woman who was currently performing the operation with full concentration. Upon seeing her, a slightly stunned expression came over his countenance.
Because of that time and all its weight, today feels kinder somehow. I picture the day when the dream I chased finally arrives beyond the long uncertain night. A new sky waits for me. I don't have to be.
She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 24. Meeting each other. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Justin had seen a photo of Anti before, but the woman who was performing the surgery. She seemed much thinner than the one in the photo. He stood quietly behind the crowd. No one was allowed to enter the operating room in the middle of the operation. If it weren't for the fact that this hospital belonged to the Hunts, it would also have been very difficult for him to enter. Therefore, Justin abided by the rules very much and didn't go forward immediately. He intended to wait until Anti had finished the operation before he approached her. The operating room was very quiet. Only a woman's professional but hoarse voice sounded from time to time. What's her heart rate? Her blood pressure? Number 10 blade. Hemostatic forceps. She had likely already been operating on the patient for 6.5 hours. The assistant behind her was constantly wiping the perspiration off her brow, but even now, her hands were still very stable and didn't show any traces of trembling at all. Her eyes, as she stared intently at the operating table, were focused and serious. Although one couldn't see her face, she nevertheless exuded an indescribable charm. Justin initially thought that he had arrived too early and felt rather irked that he had to wait here for 20 minutes. But as he watched her perform the dry and boring surgery, before he knew it, the time had actually already gone by. This continued until she finally said, "Close the wound." The assistant who had been behind her all this time replied, "Okay." The chief surgeon was the one who performed the operation while the assistant did the simple stitching at the end. Everything had gone smoothly in the operation so far. But at this point, it seemed like someone had accidentally bumped the tray that an assistant was holding, and the scalpel on it suddenly fell onto the ground. The scene instantly became a little chaotic. The lights around the operating table were very bright, which caused the sides to look a little dark in comparison. Anti was hidden right among the assistants moving about. Anti, who was among them, reprimanded, "Why were you so careless? It's fortunate that the final stitches are the only thing left. You guys, go and clean up with me." Okay. The assistants, together with Anti, were all wearing surgical gowns of the same color. They headed straight to the sterile area. Justin quickly followed after them. After entering the sterile area, they took off their goggles, masks, and gloves and washed their hands with running water. Except for one, the rest were all blonde. Anti wasn't blonde. Thus, Justin walked straight behind the only person who wasn't blonde there, clapped his hand over her shoulder, and said, "Hello, Anti. I've heard a lot about you." However, the woman that turned around was a plain Jane. She looked at Justin in surprise and said, "Dr. Anti has already left. I'm Lily, her assistant." "You are?" Justin frowned. It was then that he realized that he had been fooled. Did Anti really think she could get away today, though? He took a step back, picked up his cell phone, and called Lawrence. He ordered coldly, lock down all of the operating room's exits, and check all the personnel inside. "Yes, sir." In the operating room. From the corner of her eye, Nora could see Justin going out of the ward. She let out a huge sigh of relief as she stood in front of the operating table. She had already known before she came as Anti to perform the operation that the news would definitely get out and attract the attention of that man with high social status. Therefore, she had already made preparations for it beforehand. It was common knowledge that the chief surgeon didn't do trivial things like sutures. However, Nora demanded perfection when operating on her aunt, so she would definitely do it herself. To everyone else, Anti had already left with the assistants, Who would have thought that she had merely turned around amidst the chaos earlier and was actually still here? She moved quickly. Within a mere 10 minutes, the stitching was completed. Finally, after checking her aunt's various data indicators, she announced, "Operation successful." The duty of postoperative care was given to a professional nurse. She and the 2 remaining assistants then followed the observing doctors to the sterile area. Nora yawned sleepily. The toll that a 7-hour operation took on one was unimaginable. To people who naturally had a weak constitution like her, it was very punishing. She would probably have to sleep for 14 to 15 hours straight when she gets back later. She was just thinking about that when she suddenly noticed Lily, who was in the sterile area, giving her a look. Nora paused. A foreboding feeling suddenly arose in her. The next moment, she saw a row of bodyguards in black standing at the operating room entrance and checking everyone's identities one by one. Lily demanded angrily, "What is the meaning of this, Mr. Hunt? We were invited to perform an operation. Why should we undergo your unreasonable cross-examination?" Justin stood guard at the door with an unwelcoming presence, his tall figure exuding a strong sense of oppression. Next to him, an expressionless Lawrence replied, "My apologies, miss. You're not doctors employed by this hospital after all. Should any accidents happen to the patient, I'm afraid we'll have to take responsibility. Therefore, please leave behind your contact information." Nora cast her eyes downward slightly and sighed inwardly. That tyrant is really hard to get rid of. How about fighting her way out? However, her sore fingers and weak legs were telling her that she currently didn't have enough strength to do that. She didn't notice that Justin had been staring at her. Even though she was wearing a surgical gown, her figure was very similar to Antai's. Everyone in front was cooperating with Lawrence's investigation, but she was the only one standing at the back and looking a little like she had a guilty conscience. Justin strode over to her. His thin lips parted slightly and he said, "That was a really good trick. You almost had me there." Everyone looked over, making Nora the focus of the sterile zone. Justin said solemnly, "Dr. Antai, why don't you take off your mask?" The man was tall, and there was an intimidating and oppressive air around him when he stood in front of one. Nora suddenly let out a low chuckle. Then, she reached up and took off her mask and goggles. The goggles hooked onto her surgical cap, causing her dark hair to also cascade along with the action. Justin's eyes widened at the sight of her familiar and exquisite visage. How could it possibly be her? Nora lowered her eyes like she always did and said in a low and lazy voice, "Since you've caught me, I have nothing to say." Justin's heart skipped a beat. Then, he heard her continue and say, "I am indeed in the wrong for sneaking into the operating room to watch over my aunt. If the hospital wants to hold me accountable, I'll take it." Then, she looked up and said frostily, "However, as a family member of the patient, I should think that the hospital can understand why I did that." Her voice was cool and clear like the clink of glasses, which gave off a sense of steadiness. The first thought that came to Justin's mind was actually, so she didn't ignore her aunt. Nora observed the man in front of her. The look in his eyes was unfathomable and his eyes were deep and dark. Even the mole at his eye exuded an unpredictable and mysterious air. She didn't know whether he believed her or not. While she was thinking, the man suddenly said, "If Miss Smith agrees to a condition of mine, then on behalf of the hospital, I can promise not to hold you accountable." "What is it?" Justin let out a low cough and said, "Come back to the hotel with me and play with my son for 2 hours." Pete had been angry with him since the night before and had ignored him even all the way until he went out and kept asking for mommy. Now that he knew that she wasn't such a cold-hearted and unfeeling person, his son would definitely cheer up if he brought her back, right? Nora was bewildered.
To make me like today a little more than before. Your smile lightens my whole day, spreading like a small warm glow through the quiet part of my heart. These calm and tender moments set the rhythm of my morning. Good
She becomes
vibes,
glamorous
good
after the
life.
engagement annulment. Chapter 25. Triggered? Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. If her memory was serving her right, the first time they met, he had warned her to stay away from his son. When they were at the movies the day before, he had also given her another warning. Was the man suddenly out of his mind? Seeing her surprised, a somewhat uncomfortable look came over Justin's face. In order to get close to him, that woman had done everything possible to get Pete's approval. Therefore, she would never miss this opportunity. He was just thinking about it when he saw Nora casting her eyes downward coolly. "You must be mistaken, Mr. Hunt. I'm not a child care teacher. Neither do I have any fantasies about you." Justin paused. Nora took a step forward. With a momentum that didn't lose out to his in any way, she said, "Also, if the hospital really wants to hold me accountable, please contact my lawyer." After saying that, she covered her mouth, yawned, leisurely walked past Justin, and left the operating room. She was already on the verge of falling asleep. How would she possibly have the time to play with a kid? The most important thing now was to hurry back home and sleep. Even Justin didn't have the right to detain people at will. If he couldn't find Anti, then the only thing he could do was release them. In the car back to the hotel, Lawrence complained, "Can Anti be an eel? Why is she so slippery? How did she get out when I was obviously standing guard outside?" Justin, who was in the back seat, replied, "There are 3 possible explanations. 1, our intel was wrong and Anti is blonde. 2, Anti has very good moves and managed to escape, but this is unlikely. Yes, we surrounded the area very securely. Unless the hospital has an underground tunnel or she can fly, there's no way she can get out." Then Lawrence asked, "What's the 3rd possibility?" Justin kept quiet. Then he turned and looked outside the car and slowly said, "Nora Smith is Anti." The corners of Lawrence's lips spasmed a little. Compared to that, I'd rather believe the second one. We've already thoroughly investigated Miss Smith. Someone who has never even gone to school can't possibly be Anti. Speaking of her, though, it turned out that she was the one that emailed Anti. That was why Anti had come. No wonder she was always so calm whenever her aunt's surgery was mentioned. As it turned out, it was because she had total confidence. Justin pressed his lips together tightly and frowned. Then he suddenly said, "Find someplace where we can buy a Barbie." In the stairwell on the top floor of Hotel Finest, the 2 children had sneakily met up. An aggrieved Cherry whined, "I haven't played any games for 2 days, Pete. Daddy is too strict. He doesn't let me use the cell phone." Pete replied, "Let's switch back for now." Cherry nodded. Yes. Let's switch again after I've played my games for a day." "Yeah." Cherry sighed. "Daddy really hates Mommy, Pete. What should we do?" Pete frowned. After pondering for a while, he said, "If the soft approach doesn't work, then let's try the hard approach." Cherry's eyes lit up. "What kind of hard approach?" The 2 little ones put their heads together and discussed for a long time before they finally reluctantly separated. Before leaving, Cherry blinked and said triumphantly, "By the way, the doctor made me do an IQ test today. My IQ is really high. The doctor rewarded me with a prize, and even Daddy was speechless with astonishment. Mommy had also let her do something similar before, and even praised her and called her a genius. She had made her brother proud today." Pete, who believed her again, praised her. "You're so awesome." He returned to the room. He was just about to enter the study and spend some time doing some revision when he heard the door open. Justin strode in. He took off his coat. Then he walked over and said, "Don't be mad anymore, Pete. Take a look at the toy that Daddy bought you." Pete's eyes lit up. The tyrant was always urging him to study every day and rarely let him play. He had actually bought him toys today? Then he saw Justin walk over with a big pink Barbie and place it on his desk. A question mark slowly appeared in Pete's mind again. Seeing that his son didn't react, Justin thought he was still mad and asked gently, "Shall Daddy play with you?" Pete stared at him with an indescribable expression. Seeing that he was finally reacting, Justin braced himself and suggested, "Let's style Barbie's hair and change her." He opened the Barbie's box packaging and took out the doll. However, after picking up a lock of hair, his fingers, which were extremely nimble and flexible while playing the piano, froze. With a constipated look, Justin looked at his son and asked, "Do you know how to tie a braid, Pete?" Pete was speechless. After the two stared at each other for a long time, Pete finally slowly uttered, "This is so stupid." Justin's face instantly darkened. For some reason, his son's calm and unflappable expression made him unable to control his anger. "I'm doing this all for you." Pete lowered his head and flipped open the book, completely ignoring him. Justin was shocked. Then, he stared at the question that his son was looking at. The question was beyond Pete's current syllabus, so he asked, "Can you understand such a difficult question when you don't even have a strong understanding of your basics?" Pete raised his head and glanced at him again. Which part of this simple question was difficult? The tyrant's behavior was simply a mystery today. He said coolly, "Don't disturb me when I'm studying." Justin felt very speechless when he saw how his son was acting as if he totally understood the question when he clearly couldn't solve it, and he said, "Fine, do what you want." He would see for himself how long Pete could carry on the pretense for. After dinner, a perplexed Justin sat in the study. His son had obviously been behaving very adorably, so why did he suddenly become reserved and taciturn again? Although he seemed more normal now, for some inexplicable reason, Justin instead missed the way he had wheedled and how animated and quick-witted he had been previously. He picked up his cell phone and called the family doctor straight away. He asked, "Why is Pete's personality switching back and forth?" The doctor thought for a while and replied, maybe something had triggered him previously, causing his personality to change. A trigger. What could have possibly triggered him? Could it be that woman? Downstairs. Nora took a bath and fell into a deep sleep immediately after she came back. With her cell phone in her hand, Cherry sat on the sofa and played games with Chester. Chester was as talkative as ever while they played. He said, "Did you get into an argument with Justin again? That behavior doesn't work on him. Why don't you wheedle instead?" Also, Justin didn't manage to find Dr. Anti today, so he's in a bad mood. Aren't you just asking for it by doing that? He was looking for Dr. Anti? Cherry was stunned. She glanced at the bed in the bedroom and asked, "Chesty, why is Daddy looking for Anti?" Chester replied, "Isn't it obvious? It's for you." Before he finished, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Lewis was busy in the kitchen, so Cherry jumped off the sofa and walked over to the door. She didn't think much and opened the door right away. Justin was currently outside the door. He wanted to try asking Nora again to go upstairs to take care of his son. He got ready to speak when the door opened, only to spot Cherry right away. She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 26, A Single-Celled Organism. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. One was big and tall while the other was small and short. The two stared at each other for a full 2 or 3 seconds before the shocked Cherry subconsciously tried to close the door. Pete had told her that they mustn't acknowledge each other before Mommy and Daddy fell in love with each other. Otherwise, it would trigger a terrible battle for custody. However, the man reached out and held the door open. He asked in surprise, "Why are you here, Pete?" Cherry was terribly alarmed. Justin's expression was dark and overcast. He bent over, picked up Cherry, and ordered, "Come upstairs with me." "But Daddy will discover what's going on when we go up and run into Pete." Cherry struggled and shouted, "Let me go. Mommy, help." Mrs. Lewis, who heard her cries, rushed out of the kitchen to see Justin entering the elevator with Cherry in his arms. Shocked, she ran over to the bedroom in a panic and woke Nora, who was in a deep sleep. "Nora, wake up. Something has happened. Mr. Hunt took Cherry." Nora was in a deep sleep, but she instantly woke up when Mrs. Lewis shook her awake. She got up and went straight out after putting on her slippers. She didn't even have the time to change. At this point, Cherry had already been brought upstairs. After they entered the presidential suite, as she watched her angry and handsome father walk toward the study with her in his arms, she thought to herself, "We're finished. We're finished." Because her father was holding her tightly, she couldn't even inform Pete about what was going on. They would definitely be exposed now. Creak. Justin stopped in his tracks as he opened the door to the study. To prevent her father from scolding and disciplining her, the quick-witted Cherry decided to take the initiative to admit her mistake first. She said weakly, "I'm sorry, Daddy." Chair. Before she could say, "Cherry didn't mean to keep it from you," she saw that the study was actually empty. After a short pause, the words at the tip of her tongue turned into, "Why, Pete didn't mean it." Her large eyes were full of confusion. Where was Pete? Where had he gone? His son's soft and tender voice made Justin's anger slowly fade away, and he couldn't bring himself to lecture him anymore. He gently put Cherry down and held her shoulders tightly as he said, "Don't leave the top floor so casually, no matter what happens, Pete." He was trembling. As the heir to the #1 family in the States, a lot of people had their eyes on the Hunts. Justin had been kidnapped before when he was a child and had only managed to return alive after going through hell. The events had almost traumatized him. That was why he had worked so hard all these years to protect and hide his son from the public eye. But how many times had Pete met Nora Smith? Yet he had sneaked downstairs. And the most frightening thing was that he didn't even notice it. What if she had ill intentions, or what if someone were to kidnap him on the way downstairs? The consequences. He didn't even dare to think about it. Sensing her father's inexplicable fear, Cherry suddenly hugged him and patted him comfortingly on the shoulder. "I won't do it anymore, Daddy." The soft and tiny figure in his arms made Justin stiffen again. This was the first time in all these years that his son had been so affectionate to him. Justin's turbulent emotions gradually calmed down as he took in the faint milk-like scent on her. He sighed deeply and, as a compromise, said, "If you really like Miss Smith that much, we can let her come up here to spend some time with you." Cherry was at a loss for words. Seeing that she had successfully glossed over the issue with her dad, Cherry looked at the half-completed workbook on the desk and wondered, where's Pete? Meanwhile, Chester, whom the other two had neglected, was currently on the sofa in the living room and doubting his life choices. 2 minutes ago, he was playing games with his team leader when he suddenly heard Justin's angry voice and his nephew's calls for help. As his sidekick in the game, Chester absolutely had to stick up for him. Thus, even though he was terribly afraid of the tyrant, he had still rushed over, intending to save Pete from danger. This way, Pete would probably scold him a little less often in the game, right? But in the end, what he saw was that Pete was currently safe and sound while doing his homework. He had suspected that his eyes were deceiving him at that time, and he even deliberately rubbed his eyes. But when he looked over again, he found that his nephew was still sitting right there. He picked up the phone again after that. The game's voice chat was still connected, and he could clearly hear his team leader calling for help. "Stupid Daddy, let me go. I'm gonna look for Mommy. I don't want to go upstairs." Then, he saw his nephew put down the pen and rush out without a word. About 20 seconds later, the door was pushed open. Justin walked in with Pete, and the two of them entered the study again. Chester rubbed his eyes again. The child that Justin was carrying did indeed look exactly like his nephew. And her conversation with Justin was also still being transmitted to his cell phone through the game's voice chat. But if the person who had been playing games with him all this time was his nephew, then who was it doing homework here just now? Also, his nephew had changed into another outfit in the span of 20 seconds? He stood up blankly and walked out with his cell phone. As soon as he went out, he ran into the family doctor. He grabbed the doctor's hand right away and said in a troubled voice, "Please give me a checkup document. Why am I hallucinating when I'm still so young? Do I have some kind of mental illness? I don't want to die yet." The doctor was rendered speechless. It seemed like he had suddenly become terribly busy. Meanwhile, Pete was in the stairwell and going down the stairs. Through the glass on the door to the stairwell, he saw his father enter the suite with Cherry in his arms, and he became relieved right away. It was fortunate that Uncle Chester had arrived in time. Otherwise, everything would really be exposed. He waited there for a while until Cherry sent him a voice message. After the two little ones exchanged information with each other, a troubled Cherry asked, "Uncle Chester saw both you and me just now. Will he realize something?" Pete replied, "No." "Why?" Pete pursed his lips and replied, "He's a single-celled organism. He can't imagine anything that complicated." None of them knew that he had a younger twin sister. Had he not bumped into Cherry, he wouldn't have understood why Mommy had acted so familiarly with him. Even the tyrant had never once imagined anything like that, let alone his simple-minded uncle. Pete put down his phone and walked downstairs. He had only just taken a step down when he heard hurried footsteps. Right after that, Nora came rushing up. She looked terribly angry, as if she wanted to fight someone to the death. When she saw him, relief came over her and she asked, "Are you on your way back, Cherry?" Pete nodded. "Yeah." Nora hesitated for a moment, but didn't say much in the end. She turned around to head back down and said, "Let's go home first." Then, she took Pete's hand and went downstairs. On the way back, she felt as if her daughter had become a lot quieter than before. After returning to the room, Nora scanned Pete up and down. She stared at him and asked, "Are you sure Justin didn't do anything to you, Cherry?" Seeing how Mommy was so nervous, Pete nodded. At this point, Mrs. Lewis came over. She frowned and asked, "Why are you in a different set of pajamas, Cherry?" She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 27, Pete the Little Princess. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. The look in Nora's eyes instantly sharpened when she heard this. A girl going out and returning in different clothes now, this was no doubt something serious. Seeing that Mommy had become suspicious, Pete looked at Mrs. Lewis calmly and replied, "No, I'm not. Did you remember wrongly?" Mrs. Lewis hesitated when she saw how sure he was. "Really?" "Uh-huh." Pete then changed the subject. He imitated Cherry's way of speaking and said, "Go to bed, Mommy. I'm gonna go play games too." Her daughter was behaving a little weirdly, but Nora was simply too sleepy. Even her mind was in a total daze. She nodded and said, "All right." She would settle the scores with Justin again after she woke up. Abducting her daughter from her place without even so much as a greeting was absolutely intolerable. This time, she slept straight until noon the next day. When Nora woke up, she saw a text message from Lisa saying that her aunt was awake and that she wanted her to visit her together with Cherry if she was free. Nora went to wash up first. But when she came out, she instead saw Mrs. Lewis having a stare down with her daughter again. Mrs. Lewis, who was holding a beautiful princess dress, was trying to coax Cherry into wearing it. She said, "Why don't you wear this, Cherry? You're visiting your elders, so you have to be appropriately dressed." Pete was expressionless as he stared at the pink puffy dress. He felt that he would probably die of embarrassment if he put on the dress. Nora frowned and asked softly, "Can you tell Mommy why you don't want to wear a princess dress today, baby?" Although Cherry had boys' clothing, deep down, she was actually a little princess. She loved dressing up the most whenever she had to visit her elders. Seeing that Nora had become a little suspicious, Pete could only grit his teeth and take the dress from Mrs. Lewis. Because it was autumn, the dress even came with a pair of white leggings. Pete was lost for words. He entered the bedroom, put on the dress with much difficulty, and came back out after that. When he saw Nora's satisfied expression, he heaved a silent sigh. For the sake of their reunion as a family, he was really doing so much. When she saw how her daughter looked as if she couldn't even walk properly anymore after not having worn a princess dress for so long, Nora decided to just pick her up. Then she walked out. When she entered the hallway, she subconsciously hit her daughter's face. Nora's mother had passed away just a year after she was born. She left behind only her last words that forbade her from behaving in a way that showed off her abilities. She was to keep a low profile and be plain and mediocre until she gained the ability to protect herself. Otherwise, she would be in danger. She didn't know what kind of danger her mother was referring to, but she had always followed her instructions. This led to her forming a habit of being cautious and staying low-key. The two of them went downstairs and took a cab to the hospital. When they arrived, they went straight to the VIP ward. Irene, who had bandages around her head, was already awake. A checkup in the hospital had shown that she didn't suffer any damage to the brain at all. The operation had practically gone perfectly. The troubled looks on Lisa and Will's faces a few days ago had already disappeared, and they were elated to see her. Lisa even rushed up to them and hugged Pete. "Are you Cherry? You're so cute and pretty." Pete was lost for words. Amidst all the joy and happiness in the ward, a hostile voice suddenly reached them. "Tisk, disappearing during the operation because you were afraid of being held responsible, and then returning like a good person once the operation went smoothly. Nora, you're very scheming indeed." What accompanied the voice was a red-eyed Angela walking in. She had rather serious dark circles under her eyes filled with a hateful look. The school had issued her a warning after Dr. Anti exposed her the day before, which cost her the title of Most Excellent Graduate in her college's School of Medicine this year. She tried to incite discord between Nora and the blacks and said, hatefully, all she did was just move her fingers a little and send an email to Anti, and all of you are already so grateful to her? If she really cared about Aunt Irene, she wouldn't have left during the operation. As the patient in question, Aunt Irene would definitely be sad, right? As soon as the thought formed in Angela's mind, she heard Irene say, "Thanks for yesterday, Nora." Nora chuckled and replied, "No problem at all." The two exchanged a look. As if they had some kind of tacit understanding between them, both of them turned a deaf ear to Angela's words, which made her cheeks burn. She looked like a clown for trying to sow discord between them just now. Mad and anxious, she was about to say something when Wendy asked, "Is this your daughter, Nora?" "She's so cute." Nora frowned. She found her annoying. At this point, Irene also asked, "Why are all of you here?" The Smiths had never once expressed any concern when she was hospitalized, yet they were coming here so frequently these days. They were really getting in the way of her catching up with Nora. A look of disdain flashed across Wendy's eyes. Did Irene really think that she wanted to come to a place like a hospital? It was all because Nora refused to answer their calls, so they had to come to the hospital to look for her. Henry, who was the last to enter, frowned and replied, "We're here to visit you, of course." After speaking, he followed Wendy's gaze and looked at Pete. He put on a fake smile and said, "So, is this Cherry? Although her father may be a ruffian, she looks pretty cute." Pete retorted, "My father is not a ruffian." Angela scoffed and said, "You're right. Not even your mother knows who your father is. Maybe he's not a ruffian, but an even more unbearable beggar, or perhaps a criminal. In any case, based on your mother's looks back then, no man who's even slightly normal would ever take a fancy to her." Nora blocked Pete from them, rolled up her sleeves, and asked coldly, "Was the beating last time not enough?" She didn't care about their mockery, but she was afraid that Cherry would be sad. Thinking of the slap Nora had given her previously, Angela took a step back and hid behind Henry. "Dad, look at her. She wants to hit me even when you're here. She's too overbearing." Henry threatened angrily, "You just try laying a hand on her, Nora. You're really running riot, aren't you?" Wendy stepped forward to mediate between them. She said, "Don't be violent in front of children. Nora, when I saw Cherry, I couldn't help but wonder if that little boy from back then is still alive. He'd probably also be very good-looking, won't he?" When she said that, Nora suddenly looked at her. All these years, she had repeatedly asked Henry where he had abandoned the child from back then. He had always kept mum about it, so why were they bringing it up today? Sure enough, Henry took out the agreement again the next moment. Aren't you looking for your son? Sign the ownership transfer agreement, and I'll tell you where I abandoned that little bastard. Nora clenched her fists. A grave look appeared in her eyes. Henry added forcefully, "You've been back in the States for a week, haven't you? You've also approached a few private investigators, but I believe they don't have any news, right? I'll tell you this. I'm the only one in this world who knows where your son is. If you really want your son back, then sign the agreement." Nora's son was her weakness. Nora took the pen from Henry without hesitation to sign the agreement. At the sight, the eyes of Pete, who was next to her, widened in horror. "Mommy, don't." Nora turned to him and said, "Stop making a fuss, Cherry. If we can find your brother, I'm willing to give up everything I have, let alone the company." He realized how much Mommy loved him. Pete's eyes reddened, and he hurriedly grabbed Nora's hand.
Your gentle words lift my heart just like the morning light. In this easy, quiet feeling, I hope the moment stays a while. If days could start with warmth like this, the world would feel a bit more bright. I don't need forever, just a little more of this soft time.
She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 28. I know your son's whereabouts. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas glass of milk next to him. Seeing that Mommy was about to sign the agreement, in that split second, Pete suddenly picked up the glass of milk next to him and splashed it all on the papers. Nora had only written a word when the milk soaked through the papers. The ink immediately ran, obviously invalidating the agreement. Henry cursed angrily. "What are you doing, you little bastard?" Pete held the glass with an innocent look and replied, "My hand slipped." Upon hearing his reply, Angela stepped forward angrily and raised her hand immediately. "You little bastard, you did that on purpose. I'm going to kill you." Nora bent over, picked him up, and held him protectively in her arms. With a sinister look, she snapped, "How dare you?" Lisa braced herself and held Angela back. "I'm sure she didn't do it on purpose, Angela." Irene also stretched out her arm anxiously. "What are you being serious with a 5-year-old for, Henry? It's just a contract. Just print another copy." Henry was terribly furious. He was just about to get his hands on the agreement, but a 5-year-old had actually ruined everything. Wendy gnashed her teeth in fury. However, she managed to stay more rational and she ordered, "Go back to the Smiths and reprint the agreement." Nora narrowed her eyes. She looked at her daughter in her arms and said, "I'm sending Cherry back to the hotel first." Even if it was for the sake of finding her son, there was no way she would let her daughter come to any harm. Henry sneered, "Heh, you sure are being rather protective of a little girl who isn't even worth a few dollars. We'll wait for you at the Smiths." Nora walked out with Pete in her arms. Wendy pushed Angela lightly and said, "Take the car and follow your sister to the hotel, Angela. Your dad and I will take a cab back home." Angela stomped her foot and demanded, "Mom, why?" Wendy lowered her voice and replied, "What if she doesn't come over after returning to the hotel? Go and keep tabs on her." Only then did Angela finally realize what she meant and hurriedly chased after Nora. On the way to the hotel, Pete sat in the car's back seat, his eyes cast downward in deep thought. He had only temporarily interrupted Mommy from signing the agreement just now. If he wanted to destroy the baddie's plans, he'd need to think of another solution. He quietly picked up his cell phone and sent a text message to Cherry. "Cherry, are you there? It's urgent." Cherry replied very quickly, "I'm here. What's up?" With his eyes downcast, Pete continued to send her messages. Use Daddy's cell phone and send an anonymous email to Mommy. Do it fast. The email's content is... Nora's cat-like eyes were slightly downcast. She looked unperturbed, but in truth, waves had long been churning in her heart, and she felt awfully restless. Would her father really tell her where her son was after she signed the agreement? She was still thinking about it when her cell phone suddenly vibrated. She picked it up casually, but after glancing at it, she suddenly froze. An anonymous email lay quietly in her mailbox. There were only a few words in the email. "I know your son's whereabouts. Don't sign the agreement." The look in Nora's eyes immediately turned cold. Who had sent her the email? She placed the phone horizontally in her lap. Her two cool, pale, and slender fingers quickly tapped away on it as she tried to track the sender's location. Suddenly, her eyes widened in shock and her hands abruptly drew back. That was so close. It was fortunate that she had stopped in time. A little more and her cell phone would have been forcefully shut down and rendered useless. Who exactly had sent her the email? They were actually able to get Y, the internationally renowned hacker, to write firewall software for them. The authenticity of the email's content was worth considering, but more importantly, it had suddenly given her a wake-up call. Nora's long, slender fingers tapped against the car seat as she thought about everything that had happened during this week after she returned to the States. Both the Grays and the Smiths seemed to hold great interest in the small company that her mother had left her. There were definitely secrets that she was unaware of hidden in the company. The car quickly arrived at the hotel. "What? You're not signing the agreement anymore." Angela yelled sharply, "Don't you want to look for your son anymore?" Nora raised an eyebrow and sneered, "I'm not stupid. What if Dad gives me false information after I sign the agreement? How am I supposed to tell whether it's true or not?" Angela stomped her foot in anger. "Nora, how can you go back on your word?" Nora took Pete's hand and, with her eyes downcast, said coldly, "You want me to give you the company? Sure. Tell him to find my son and bring him to me first." After leaving behind those words, she took Pete's hand and walked straight into the hotel. She had only just taken a couple of steps when she suddenly heard someone exclaim, "Wake up! Wake up!" Her keen intuition as a doctor made her look over abruptly. At once, she saw a middle-aged man collapsed at the side. His face had turned pale, and he was clearly not breathing anymore. Nora said to Pete, "Go upstairs by yourself first, Cherry. I'll go over and take a look." On the top floor of the hotel, Cherry was combing her newly bought Barbie's hair. Justin was seated on the sofa next to her and staring at his cell phone solemnly. Q, the international hacker, had actually tried to bypass his cell phone's firewall just now. He didn't know what Q's purpose in doing so was. While he was musing over it, Cherry picked a pink tutu dress from the Barbie's row of princess dresses and asked, "How does this one look, Daddy?" Justin, who couldn't bring himself to watch, replied, "It's passable." "What about this one? There are so many pearls on it and it's shiny." "It'll do." "Daddy, you're so patronizing. You didn't even look at it." Justin looked up to see his son with his hands on his hips. He looked very adorable and very much like a little princess with his cheeks all puffed up angrily. Although Justin liked his son lively, he was nevertheless still blinded by how he looked. Thus, he simply stood up and went to the study. "I'll go and finish some work." He needed some time alone. He tried hard to convince himself to accept it. In the end, he consoled himself by telling himself that as long as his son didn't wear a princess dress, everything was fine. At this point, Lawrence walked in and gave him his report. He said respectfully, "Mr. Hunt, we've reinvestigated Miss Smith." Justin sat upright and said coldly, "Tell me." Nora Smith has been fat since she was a child. Due to poor health, she didn't go to school much. 5 years ago, she couldn't bear the loneliness and became impregnated by an unknown man before marriage. She gave birth to a daughter afterward. It's said that the Grays were very displeased about it, so the Smiths had to send them abroad to get out of the public eye. Lawrence frowned after he finished going through the basic information. There's something very strange, though. There's no information at all about Miss Smith during her 5 years abroad. It's as if someone had erased all the traces. Anti had become famous 3 years ago. It was very hard for someone to pick up medicine in just 2 years. Moreover, her technique was so immaculate, so she must have gone through a great deal of practice. Lawrence continued and said, but one thing is for certain, Nora Smith has never learned any medicine. Therefore, we can nearly rule out the possibility that she's anti. Justin was a little disappointed. At this point, Lawrence suddenly heard a voice in his earphones. After listening, his expression changed slightly. Something has gone wrong in the hotel lobby.
A gentle, wordless hope kept breathing softly inside me. I picture the moment when the dream I've chased for years comes true. Dark nights always soften and morning colors start to appear. I don't need
She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 29, First Aid. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Justin asked solemnly what happened. Lawrence explained, a guest fainted in the lobby. According to the lobby manager, he's not breathing anymore. They've already dialed 911. A doctor happened to be nearby, so they are currently giving him first aid. Hotel Finest's guests were either rich or enjoyed a high social standing. The hotel would also be held responsible if something were to happen, so Justin immediately instructed, go and take a look. Yes, sir. After Lawrence went out, Justin walked out of the study and found that his son was not in the living room. He asked, where's Pete? The nanny replied, he went next door. Justin was puzzled. A foreboding feeling arose in him. In the suite next door, Chester pointed to the mountain of clothes piled up on the sofa and announced, these are for you. Cherry exclaimed, all of them. Yep, I went to a few children's wear stores and got them to give me one of each design in your size. Chester circled around her a few times and asked, can you scold me a little less in the game in the future? Cherry looked at her poor uncle and blinked. I'll try. Whenever she started playing, she would immediately transform uncontrollably into a little ogre. This really wasn't her fault, though, because it was her uncle who was simply too lousy. Cherry sighed and rummaged casually through the clothes. While doing so, she suddenly took out a pink princess tutu dress. They must have packed it in by mistake. Chester reached over to set the dress aside, but he instead saw his nephew's eyes lighting up. This is beautiful. Chester was perplexed. Cherry said, I'm gonna try it on. In order to play the role of her brother, she had been forced to dress like a tomboy every day. This had seriously impaired her looks. Cherry entered the bedroom, changed into the dress, and looked at herself left and right in the mirror. It was at this moment that her cell phone suddenly rang. She picked up. Hi, Pete. Pete said, let's switch back right away, Cherry. You used Daddy's phone to send an email just now, so I have to remove the traces, or he'll find out otherwise. Okie dokie. Cherry slipped out of the bedroom. She was about to leave when she saw Justin exit their suite and about to come over. She panicked and said, I'm at Uncle Chester's, but Daddy's coming over now. Pete, who was hiding in the stairwell, stuck his head out. If Daddy brought Cherry away with him, they would probably have to wait for another chance to switch back. However, if that happened, the likelihood of Daddy finding out about the email would increase. Pete decided to wager on his uncle's IQ. Pete suddenly darted out of the stairwell and called out Daddy. Justin, who was about to knock, was taken aback for a moment. He glanced over at the source of the voice and found that Pete was standing nearby in a princess dress. The sight shocked Justin. With a troubled expression, he took Pete back to their suite. After the two of them went in, Cherry quietly opened the door, ran to the stairwell while holding her dress up, and went downstairs. A stunned Chester was rooted to the ground. His nephew had gone home in a princess dress. After a while, he suddenly thought of something and rushed next door in a panic. Justin, I was the one that bought the dress, but listen to me. It's not what you're thinking. Bam. Justin slammed the door shut and gritted his teeth as he said, "Stay away from my son." Chester was lost for words. I'm innocent, he thought. After shutting out the culprit that was to blame for all these, Justin turned back to look at his son and observed him seriously. Pete was wearing a princess dress, and there was a pink headband on his naturally wavy short hair. His exquisite facial features, as well as the smooth and practiced way he had combed Barbie's hair today. Doubts finally formed in Justin's mind, and he asked, "Are you really my son?" Pete nodded seriously. Justin suddenly asked, "What did I get you for your birthday when you were 3? Pete was silent for a moment before he answered, "French for kids. First 100 words and introduction to programming." "How much Christmas money did Grandma give you last year?" $2 million. At the sight of Justin's look of self-doubt, Pete couldn't help but feel a little bad. He tugged on his dress and said, "I'll go and change." Justin watched his son enter the bedroom, but even after thinking about it for a while, he simply couldn't help but feel like something wasn't right. He suddenly walked over and pushed the door open. There was no one in the bedroom, but he could hear the sound of running water from the bathroom. His son was probably peeing. Ever since Pete turned 5, he refused to let him bathe him anymore. Justin strode over. The head of the dignified #1 family in the States, at his height of 6 feet 2 inches, stood secretly at the door and glanced into the bathroom. It really was his son. He hadn't been replaced. While he was relieved, he actually found himself a little disappointed. How nice would it be if the one spending time with him before had been a daughter instead? After relieving himself, Pete turned to see Justin staring at him. Their eyes met, and the two of them kept quiet for a long time. At last, Pete frowned and said, "What a pervert." He walked out disdainfully as he said, "Daddy, you should go see a psychiatrist." At the lobby downstairs, Nora looked at the man who had collapsed. He was motionless, and it looked like he wasn't breathing anymore. "I am a medical student. Step aside, I'll perform CPR on him." Angela had also rushed over. She took out a piece of paper to cover the man's mouth, and then she started to perform CPR on him. It was obvious at first glance that the man who had collapsed was either wealthy or enjoyed a high social status. If she saved him, she would definitely be handsomely rewarded. However, even after doing chest compressions for 2 minutes, the man still showed no response. Nora pushed her aside. "Let me take a look." Angela, who was pushed aside, frowned and yelled angrily, "What for?" "Nora, you're not a doctor. Don't waste time that I can use to save him instead." Nora quickly pressed down on the man's chest a few times. He was experiencing tension pneumothorax. This was an acute condition. As there was fluid accumulation in the chest, performing CPR was useless. By the time the ambulance comes, it would probably be too late. He needed immediate chest drainage surgery. When she saw that Nora was ignoring her, Angela shouted even more angrily, "I get it now. Are you trying to curry a favor because he looks important? Come on, take her away. Don't waste time that I can use to save him. I can't continue with the CPR if she's here." The middle-aged woman kneeling next to the man looked at Nora when she heard Angela's words. She said, "You're not a doctor? Then get out of the way." Nora turned a deaf ear to their words. She stood up and rushed over to the front desk. After asking them for the first aid kit, she quickly returned. She took out gloves and rubbing alcohol, pulled a paring knife from her waist, and sterilized the tools. Then, she pulled the man's shirt open, pressed down on the mid-clavicular line of his second intercostal space, and plunged the knife down without hesitation. Splurt! Blood spurted from the wound, scaring everyone around them into backing away. However, the man on the ground still didn't show any response. "Murder! Murder!" A bright-eyed Angela shouted, "Call the cops. Arrest her." She had tried every possible means she could to get rid of that damned fatty, but little did she expect that she would actually self-combust. Just as Angela was all smug and triumphant, her expression suddenly froze.
weakness. You held my weakness gently, more than anyone else could do. Because of you, the colors of my world shift softly into something new. You showed me I didn't need to be perfect all the time. Those gentle words you offered still rest deeply in my heart. You helped me find my life.
She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 30. He's alive. He's alive. Translator. Atlas Studios editor. Atlas Studios. The crowd around them went into a furor. The man's wife also shouted, "What are you doing?" But the next moment, the man, who had been motionless, suddenly started breathing again. Everyone shut up. Seeing that the ambulance hadn't arrived yet, Nora took out an infusion tube from the first aid kit and inserted one end into the patient's chest cavity. The other end was inserted into a latex finger glove. She cut an opening slightly smaller than half an inch wide on the hard end of the finger glove. This was to act as a flap to allow air from inside the chest cavity to be easily discharged while preventing the outside air from entering. The breathing of the man on the ground gradually became steady. He's alive. He's alive. The people around them started clapping while the man's wife also heaved a sigh of relief. She fell onto her bottom on the ground as if she had just had a narrow escape from death as she repeated, "Thank you, thank you." There still wasn't much of an expression on Nora's face. The patient was fine now. It would be fine once the ambulance arrived and took him to the hospital. She stood up to leave, but at this point, Angela yelled sharply, "Thank you?" Simple CPR could have saved him, but she insisted on operating on him instead. Everyone was taken aback. "What?" Angela took out her student ID and said, "I'm a senior at the School of Medicine in my college, and I'm about to go for my internship soon. This gentleman here obviously just lost consciousness temporarily and went into shock. CPR would have been enough to resuscitate him. Nora, how could you perform surgery on him under those chaotic circumstances?" She reproached, "All operations have to be performed under sterile conditions. Do you know how many germs and bacteria there are here? What if his wound becomes infected?" The man's wife didn't believe her one-sided opinion. But it didn't work even when you performed CPR for so long. It was this young lady here that helped my husband to breathe again. Angela sneered, "CPR needs time for effects to show. How can he possibly get better in 2 minutes? If she hadn't stopped me, your husband would have been totally fine now. He wouldn't have had to lose so much blood." The man's wife frowned. She didn't know much about medicine, so she became a little unsure. However, she didn't say anything. Angela then spoke again. She said, "What's more is that she isn't even a doctor. She was probably bold enough to mess around because she's watched a few episodes of some medical TV drama." The wife looked at her husband, who was still lying on the ground, his breathing steady. Then she looked at Nora uncertainly and asked, "Are you really not a doctor?" Nora found the whole thing awfully stupid. She said coldly, "Does it matter whether I'm a doctor? The point is that he's still alive." Angela replied aggressively, "Of course it matters. He didn't need to be operated on. It's all because you pretended to know more than you actually do and messed around." Nora yawned. Everything will be clear once the ambulance gets here. Unless she exposed her identity as anti, these people would never believe her, no matter what she said. Angela scoffed and said, "You'd better not leave then. Why don't you stay here and prove your innocence?" "Ma'am, I'd advise you to call the police now. This is assault." While she was being noisy, the ambulance arrived fashionably late. The paramedics hurriedly carried the stretcher down. A doctor that had followed them here quickly rushed in front of the patient. After performing a full-body examination, he asked grimly, "Who performed first aid on him?" Angela's face lit up. She pointed at Nora as she answered, "She's the one that did it. She's just an idiot who has never even gone to school. How dare she operate on someone else?" The doctor's expression instantly became hesitant when she said that. He asked, "She's never even gone to school before? How did you learn your medical skills then?" Before Nora could reply, Angela spoke again. She scoffed. She probably just blindly copied whatever they did on TV. "Doctor, it's illegal to treat someone's illness without proper knowledge, right?" As soon as she said that, she saw an astonished look form on the doctor's face. He exclaimed, "You can actually perform such a flawless chest drainage operation when you haven't studied medicine professionally before? And you're so young too. You must be a genius." Angela's triumphant expression suddenly froze. What? A genius? Was someone like Nora even worthy of the title genius? The corners of Nora's lips spasmed a little. Any doctor would know first aid common sense like this. How did that make her a genius? Next to them, the man's wife immediately understood after hearing their conversation. She said, "Doctor, about my husband's condition." The doctor said, "We would have treated him in the same way even if he was sent to the hospital. It's just that the equipment would be more professional. There aren't any chest drainage bottles here, so she could only make do like she did. Also, it was fortunate that the operation was done in time. Otherwise, due to his inability to breathe, once suffocation had sustained for a long time, his internal organs would have suffered damage." After the doctor finished the explanation, he got the others to carry the patient into the ambulance. It was only after the man's wife got into the ambulance that she suddenly realized that she hadn't thanked her husband's savior yet. However, when she turned, she could no longer find any traces of Nora among the crowd. By the time Lawrence came down, the ambulance had already left. After hearing about what had happened from the service staff, Lawrence asked, "Do you know who the patient is?" The service staff replied, "It's Mr. Anderson from the second highest floor." "Mr. Anderson?" Lawrence suddenly realized something. His eyes widened and he hurriedly picked up his cell phone and called Justin. He said, "Mr. Hunt, this is terrible. The person who was feeling unwell just now is Mr. Simon Anderson." The Andersons from New York and the Hunts had been on close terms for generations. Now that Simon was hospitalized, it was common courtesy for Justin to visit him. Justin immediately said, "I'm coming down." He went to the study to check on Pete, who was reading. He seemed to have reverted to his taciturn temperament in the past. After notifying Pete that he was going out, Justin left. Before stepping out of the suite, he wordlessly picked up the dress that his son had set aside and tossed it into the trash as he went out. In the hospital. When Justin arrived, Simon was still undergoing an operation. His wife, Melissa Anderson, was seated on the bench outside the operating room, her well-maintained face full of worry. Justin walked over and greeted her. "Aunt Melissa." Melissa's eyes reddened when she saw him. She said, "He rushed over here because he heard that someone in California had news about his eldest sister. But when he heard that his sister may have already died 23 years ago and only left a daughter behind, he suddenly got sick and almost died. More than 20 years ago, the Andersons' eldest daughter had run away from home. She disappeared without a trace ever since. Over the years, the Andersons had been searching for her everywhere." Justin consoled her and said, "Uncle Simon will be fine. I've already talked to the doctors just now. They said that he received timely treatment, so he's not in danger anymore." At the mention of that, Melissa immediately said, "Justin, it was a young lady that saved Simon today. We're deeply indebted to her. Can you find out who she is? When Simon's condition stabilizes, I'd like to pay her a visit and thank her." Justin nodded. After Simon was pushed out of the operating room and his condition stabilized, Justin returned to the hotel with Lawrence. When they were getting out of the car, Lawrence said, "Mr. Hunt, let's go to the control room and check the cameras to see who that kind soul is."
Move slowly, gently, growing toward my morning. When I close my eyes, I can hear a small rhythm of quiet hope.
She becomes glamorous after the engagement annulment. Chapter 31, Anti. Translator, Atlas Studios editor, Atlas Studios. Justin thought of the genius that the doctor had sung praises of when they were in the hospital just now, and he nodded with great interest. "Okay, Unfortunately, as soon as the two of them entered the lobby, one of his assistants walked over. In a hushed voice, he said, "Mr. Hunt, you have guests from your family home. They've gone up to the top floor." Justin's expression changed drastically when he heard this. He strode over to the elevator and, with a dark expression, asked, "When did they arrive?" "They went up 5 minutes ago. The hotel belongs to the Hunts after all, so the front desk and lobby manager weren't able to stop them. A bunch of good-for-nothings." Justin cursed angrily and entered the elevator. Lawrence let out a silent sigh. He wouldn't be of any help with the situation upstairs anyway, so he went to the control room by himself. In the presidential suite on the top floor, Pete, whose eyes were red, clenched his fists and looked at the people in front of him. More than a dozen bodyguards in black from both parties were glaring at one another as they faced off. Chester, who had an awful look on his face, stood in between them and Pete. He said, "What are you doing, Howard? Justin won't let you off when he comes back." Howard Hunt, the man in front of him and also his second cousin, had sinister eyes and a hooked nose. He smiled sinisterly and said, "This has nothing to do with you, Chester. Get out of the way. I'm here on Grandpa's order to bring that disrespectful little bastard back to the family home." Chester wasn't agreeable to it. "Whatever it is that you want to do it only when Justin gets back here. You can't take him away now." Howard's expression turned cold and he said, "Don't think too highly of yourself, Chester. What makes you think you have a say when you don't even give two hoots about the family? Get lost." Chester was so furious that his face was all flushed. The only reason why he could play games all day long was that Justin had taken all the pressure off him. Besides, his nephew was even his team leader. How could he possibly ignore what was happening? He said furiously, "I won't let you." Howard cracked his knuckles at once. It was obvious at first glance that he was very skilled at fighting. "Don't blame me if I don't hold back then." As soon as he said that, an icy cold voice reached them. "Who? Are you planning on not holding back on?" His voice, which was as low and deep as cello timbre, was emotionless. It made Howard stiffen, and he immediately withdrew his fists and gave the man walking over an ingratiating smile. "You're back, Justin." Justin's big and tall form stood in front of Chester and Pete and blocked them from Howard. His bottomless gaze landed on Howard, and the mole at the corner of his eye exuded murderous intent as he demanded, "Who said you could come here?" Fear flashed in Howard's eyes. He touched his nose and replied with a smile, "I'm not that fearless to come here and mess with you either, Justin, but these are Grandpa's orders. He said that since you've returned with that disrespectful boy, then you should return to the family home. This way, you can also discuss how Pete should be punished." A grim Justin took a step forward. "Why does he have to be punished?" Howard was so frightened that he took a step back. "Why are you feigning ignorance, Justin? There's something mentally wrong with that boy. How nice was Grandaunt to him? But just because he argued with her a little, he pushed her off the stairs and caused her to suffer a brain hemorrhage. Even now, she's still lying in the hospital with her life in danger. Someone has to answer for this." A large family held great power. The reason why the Hunts could keep their position at the pinnacle in the States was that they had talents in every industry. Justin's permanent residence was in New York, but the family home had always been in California. During the holidays, the Hunts would return and gather. Disciplinary action toward members of the family was also carried out in the family home. Justin had always respected his granduncle who watched over the family home. Howard was his granduncle's grandson. He was the one who would have to take over the responsibility of watching over the family home in the future. Justin narrowed his frosty eyes. "I told you, it wasn't Pete." Howard shrugged. "Do you have any proof?" "Because we have witnesses. Moreover, Pete was indeed upstairs when it happened. There were signs that the two were having a dispute." Justin clenched his jaw. "I'm already looking for Dr. Anti to have her take a look at Grandma." Howard curled his lip. "It's not easy to find Anti." Justin let out a cold snort. "I will drag her back here even if that's what I have to do." "Justin, because you're staying here with Pete, my side of the family has been inciting everyone and causing a lot of dissatisfaction among them." Howard cast a disdainful glance at Pete and went on. Besides, who knows where that boy even came from? Neither do we know who his mother is. On top of that, he's even mentally ill. Even we aren't convinced about having him become your heir, let alone everyone else from my side of the family. Grandpa asked me to talk to you. You're still young and healthy, Justin. Won't it be nice to have another child? As for Pete, just give up on him. Shut up. Justin's eyes flashed with murderous intent, and he warned, Pete is my son, and he's the only son I'll ever have. Howard was intimidated by his presence. As the ones watching over the family home, his immediate family held very high status among the Hunts. Even all the previous heads of the family had to treat them with courtesy. However, his grandfather had mentioned before that Justin was different from the previous heads of the family. He had other identities, so they mustn't mess with him. Howard also respected, and even slightly feared, Justin. But the more that was so, the more he felt that Pete, as his son, wasn't outstanding enough. Howard fell silent for a moment. Then he took a step back and lowered his head as he said, My side of the family is making a lot of noise. By next weekend at the latest, Grandpa will have to hold a family meeting. If you cannot prove his innocence by then, the Hunts will expel Peter Hunt from the family. After saying that, he turned and left. A panicked Chester asked, What do we do, Justin? Justin, who had a dark and grim look on his face, didn't answer. The most ideal solution was to find Auntie and have her prove his son's innocence. But if they couldn't find her, he lowered his gaze dispassionately, his eyes cold. Had it not been for his father who had insisted that he take care of the family, he wouldn't have bothered himself with a trifling presence like the Hunts. But now, they actually had the guts to expel his son from the family? In that case, it was time that someone else took over the place of the #1 family in the States. A sharp look flashed across Justin's eyes. He turned behind and looked at Pete, his voice gentle and mellow as he said, There's nothing to be afraid of, Pete. Pete lowered his head and entered the study. He wasn't afraid. But great-grandma had really treated him very well. That was also the reason why he hadn't said anything about the tutors she had sent, despite them being problematic. He had kept quiet because he didn't want to tarnish great-grandma's name. After all, her life was still in danger, so she had no way of speaking up for him. He didn't want great-grandma to die either. Chester returned to the suite next door while looking at the back view of his dejected little nephew. He let out a sigh and logged on to the game. He had initially thought that his team leader was feeling down, but what he saw was that Sweet Cherry was currently active in the game. He was taken aback for a moment. Then he connected to the other party's voice chat and said, Here I was, thinking you were feeling down and out. I didn't expect that you're still in the mood to play games. Downstairs, Cherry, who was seated on the sofa, blinked when she heard him. She asked, Why would I be sad? What had happened to Pete? Chester replied, That's true. Don't worry, your father will definitely find Auntie and prove your innocence. Cherry was confused.
A melody like a passing breeze touches my heart again today, wrapped in colors I didn't know before. I start my steps in quiet